everyone. You are listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. I am Jordan Hall, and as always, I am joined by the dynamic Joe Fordyce. Joe, the Flyers offseason continues. We know what the team did in free agency. We know what it didn't do in free agency. We know the players in-house. Maybe Chuck Fletcher has another move up his sleeve down the line. Not sure about that. But we pretty much know what the team has right now on its roster going into training camp as that gets closer to September. So, Joe, let's look at some of the players that the Flyers got. We're going to break down best move, worst move, and we're going to even look at their worst non-move because I think a lot of people have opinions on that. Joe, let's get right into it. Let's start with best move. If you had to pick one, I'm smiling a little bit because I'm sure people will debate if there's even a best move. That's just the reality of what the team did this offseason. But best move in your mind this offseason by the Flyers?
Well, I'm going to say Tony DeAngelo, and I'm going to take everything out of the equation, contract term, money, all that stuff, and I'm going to say Tony DeAngelo. If Ryan Ellis is not ready to play on opening night, which I think all of us realize that that's probably what's going to be the case, Tony DeAngelo is probably your best defenseman opening night. So I feel like anytime you've added someone that could be the best player at your position, at that particular position on opening night, that has to be considered your best move. I mean, he's a dynamic offensive player. We saw him have a lot of success with a super well-coached team in Carolina. So hope Tortorella can have the same sort of effect on DeAngelo here. And you know, he's a hometown kid. Obviously, he said everything the right way. His past is – we've all heard about his past. We know about it. We're not going to get into it here. But he has some controversy in his past and quite frankly, maybe a little bit to make up for, let's say, because there are some doubts when you have a history. And taking aside, I'm not even speaking about his views or any of that sort of stuff. I'm talking more about he's had incidents with teammates. And I think that's the thing that is going to catch a lot of people's eyes. And, you know, he has to – that's never going away. That's always going to be on his record. And the best he can do is just bury it far down his record. So I definitely think that's part of the Tony DeAngelo equation here, is to kind of get people to forget about or put the past behind them. We don't really live in a world right now where that's people don't do that so well. Social media doesn't do it so well. So that's definitely part of this. But in terms of pure skill on the ice, opening night, you know, he's on your top defense pair. So I'm going to say that's their best move.
I agree, Joe. I think a lot of the debate about the DeAngelo acquisition is more about how he is viewed as a person in many people's eyes rather than the player. I think a lot of people would agree the player is a pretty decent player. Ready shot defenseman, puck mover, can put up points, will help you on the power play, will help you defensively. He's at a good age. He's 26. I think a lot of people were more upset about his past as a person. While I think it's fair to acknowledge what he's done well in the past, I think it's also fair to acknowledge what he's done most recently in the past, and that was apparently having his head on straight in Carolina, playing well, being a good teammate. Rob Brindamore, the head coach of the Hurricanes, had nothing but good things to say about him. His teammates liked him. He stayed out of trouble. He didn't say anything controversially. So I think that's fair to acknowledge, that if his second chance in Carolina, after what things went really wrong in New York, he did well for himself, and he was a good teammate and a good player. So when I look at the trade, I don't think the Flyers lost a whole lot with the picks. The highest round pick that they lost among the three comes in 2024, so it's a pick I think they can recoup eventually. And I don't think the deal's all that awful. $5 million annually over 2 years. There's no trade protection at all. So if the deal doesn't work out, they could possibly move him. They're not committed to him too long term. So I think the deal's respectable, and it's not a cap killer or a long-term killer for the Flyers. So D'Angelo, I would have to say, is the best move so far, I think, in the Flyers offseason. And really, if Ryan Ellis comes back healthy at some point, a big if, but if he does, you're looking pretty deep on defense. I think really your extra defenseman would be Cam York or Justin Braun. So that's not a bad outlook on defense where the Flyers really needed to address, given their goals against have been bad, their PK has been bad. They need to help Carter Hart, and I think D'Angelo has the potential to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And also, if you just look at the fact that he quarterbacked the power play that for a team that had one of the best records in the league. Now, I know he was playing with Jacob Slavin, who's another great defenseman. So, but still, you can't argue results. And for a lot of last year, the problem was they couldn't move the puck on the power play. I mean, we all talked about when Cam York came up, how that power play looked different because York was able to get the puck moving around. And quite frankly, it's just not really a strength of Ivan Provorov. So I think D'Angelo's presence on the power play is going to be a huge help. Who will score the goals? We'll see. But, you need that quarterback to set the guys up to score the goals. So I think that'll be a huge help. So anytime you can help your top power play unit, I don't know how you can argue that was their best move, given what he brings to the team, as well as when you look at it in the scope of all the activity. I mean, he might be the only really impactful player they brought in here. So I think that's another factor.
As we all know, the Flyers had the worst power play in the league last year, and they had issues going even back to entries, just trying to get the puck out of the defensive zone and into the offensive zone. As we know, puck-moving defensemen have a big impact in doing that, and Tony D'Angelo is a puck mover, so absolutely he can help the power play. And I think if he has matured as a person like he said he has, and like he at least showed last season in Carolina, and if he's the loyal teammate that he says he is and that others have said he can be, I think this could be a good move, because the biggest issue people have talked about with the Flyers over the last 2 seasons in which they've missed the playoffs is they haven't replaced Matt Niskanen. They haven't had a top pair defenseman alongside Ivan Provorov ever since Matt Niskanen retired. They tried to do it with Ryan Ellis last year. He got hurt. He played only 4 games. So you needed to address that hole. It's 2 years, basically, of not addressing that hole. D'Angelo gives you insurance if Ellis isn't ready, and at least you can say you have some solid stability on the back end. You're not really you're not looking at a major hole for a 3rd straight year on defense. At least D'Angelo gives you some insurance. So to me, yeah, got to be one of the best moves, if not the best, in this offseason. Joe, let's shift gears a little bit here. Worst move in your mind this offseason by Chuck Fletcher and the Flyers?
So I'm going to say the move to bring in Delorier is a puzzling one. Now, I'm not going to argue that this team didn't need toughness. There's been a lot of this narrative of being hard to play against. I do think toughness is part of the hard to play against. And Delorier brings that. The part that I don't understand is the 4-year deal and the limited no trade for a player who is, he's not he's a mediocre player at best. And that's the part I don't understand, because the whole theme around this offseason was that they didn't have a ton of maneuverability because of term and money on deals. But then there's term, not a ton of money, but there's this kind of term given to a player that I don't really know how much impact he's going to have on the team. And really, I think to kind of go in a different direction with this, I think the worst move was to just come out and say that you weren't in on these other free agents because of other deals and salary cap and things like that. Like, that's just not a I don't think that's a great message to have out there. That you have immovable contracts and you're kind of stuck in this, I mean, for lack of a better word, salary cap hell. And I just don't, there's no way to be inspired about that. Like, to hear, well, we couldn't do this because we have these deals we can't move. You know, GMs kind of find a way to get things done. And, you know, that's the job of the front office. And a lot of times that stuff stays under wraps with how they do or don't do things. And this kind of didn't. I mean, on one sense, it was a honest comment from Chuck Fletcher last week. But in the other sense, it was honesty and that didn't make you feel great. And so I'm going to say that was the worst move, was to just basically lay all the cards out there on the table, that they didn't really have any maneuverability. And then that, when you also look at the Delorier contract, it just kind of, it's a little bit of mixed messaging in terms of, you know, what the Flyers are saying. Like, are you stuck, or and if you are, what was the need to give a 4-year deal to a bottom six forward?
Yeah, I think people heard aggressive retool from the GM in January, and we've heard that now a lot since then. Well, aggressive means having to move money to bring on better players. Like, that's just part of the job of the GM. Is you're in a salary cap world, that, you know, a flat cap world from the past 2 seasons because of COVID. You need to be able to move money and make space and be creative to take on better players. And
I feel like, Jordan, aggressive retool has become the Flyers' dream team. Like, when Vince Young years ago said that the Eagles had a dream team and everything flopped, that's been stuck. Like, that's been stuck as a thing that's gone in Philly sports lore for a negative reason. And I feel like aggressive retool has now become the Flyers' version of that, and that it's going to be remembered as a thing that was that kind of just, I mean, it's different in the sense that this is not anything blowing up in their face. It's just aggressive retool doesn't match what they've done. Whereas Dream Team was him referring to the players they already got, and those guys just not living up to the expectations. But I just feel like that term is going to be a label put on this team until they turn things around and make people forget it, quite frankly.
Yeah, the messaging just doesn't line up with the action. And I think that's where I think people are just upset. That's the reason why fans are frustrated. I think some people would have understood that they didn't get Johnny Gaudreau had the team come out and said, listen, we think we're years away. We really need to restart things here a bit. We're not in the market for a big splash. But they came out and said aggressive retool. We want to get better quickly. And then you have an offseason, or at least a free agency, that was all about improving at the margins, not making a considerable move to get you a lot better. And that's where I just think people are frustrated. They're just, when fans aren't in the know, they get ticked off. If you keep them apprised and informed, and you feel like you're valuing that they're in the know, then they're okay. Then they're okay with things. They at least feel like they're being informed and apprised of what's going on with the team. At the end of the day, they're the biggest investors. They're the thing that drive the team financially, and just the overall picture of what the team does is driven by fan interest and investment. But when they're not in the know, that's the problem. And I think that's just what the messaging didn't really connect with the action. And I think that's where people are frustrated. But Joe, if I had to agree, I think Nick Delorier to me was probably the most questionable move. I don't think he's an awful player, and I think he can play a role. I'm not going to sit here and bash him and act like it was the worst move I've ever seen in my life, but There is trade protection according to Cap Friendly in the first 2 years of the deal. That's not the best thing in the world to have trade protection for a fourth line grinder.
No, and if you think about it too, the Flyers have had problems with guys because of trade protection. I mean, there's been several guys on this team where it's like, well, they have to approve a deal. I mean, obviously, most notably is Claude Giroux last year. But I just feel like when you start throwing around trade protection to anybody that wants it, down the road, you're going to find yourself in having some real problems. And I'm not saying that this is definitely going to happen, but again, this is part of the messaging. I think is you leave fans going, why did you do that?
Yeah. And apparently there was a very aggressive market after Nick Delorier. So maybe the trade protection and the 4 years that they gave him were all attractive incentives for him picking the Flyers. That could be the case. And the trade protection doesn't look great, but I will say, there's a good chance they don't even look to trade him in the first 2 years. And then it opens up in year 3 and year 4 the deal where maybe a team that's contending and ready to win now is looking to add a fourth line grinder for cheap. He's only making $1.75 million a year. Again, not like an awful deal. It's just probably the most questionable. And most questionable because for me, they talked about needing more top-end talent, more high-end talent up front for scoring purposes. They haven't scored goals over the last 2 seasons. Last year in particular, they were one of the worst goal-scoring teams in the league. They really struggled offensively. And you say you need top-end talent, and he's the only forward you add in the offseason. And he's known as a fourth-line grinder for toughness, for PKing, a guy with a career-high 10 goals. So that's just where I think I'm confused is you're thinking they're going to add some high-end talent up front, people that can make things happen, and the only forward they added was really the only NHL forward they added was Nick Delorier. So that's where I'm a little confused, and maybe there's something else to be done. Fletcher has been aggressive in the trade market throughout his tenure. All his biggest deals in every offseason of his tenure have been via trade. So maybe there's something up his sleeve, but right now that looks like the big forward they got, and it doesn't really match the offensive mindset that they were talking about in the offseason.
No, and when you add to that, we don't know what Joel Farabee is going to be when he comes back.
Right.
I mean, I understand all the projections of when he comes back, but we don't know. We've seen with injuries, we just don't know. So that could be a hit to your lineup as well. So it's not even just – there's been a lot of talk about guys coming back from injuries, but there hasn't been a lot of talk about what if guys don't just come back from injuries and aren't 100% to start the season. And I'm speaking of Sean Couturier, Joel Farabee, obviously now. I mean, and injuries happen too. So it's not as if someone flipped the switch and says, okay, well, this year you're not going to have injuries. So we've heard a lot of stuff about if they come back from injuries and if they come back from injuries, this and that. I mean, look, we sit here and I think the two of us can agree. We have no idea what's going on with Ryan Ellis. No idea. I mean, there's been a significantly lack of detail given about this player's status, I would say for 9 months now. I mean, really, we have no idea.
Yeah,
and
the most clarity.
Aside from little glimpses of him working on the side and things, and even that went away, a long time ago. So, that's one thing. And, we assume Sean Couturier is going to come back and be Sean Couturier. But we have to remember, Sean Couturier's, he's not a super young guy anymore, and he's played a lot of hockey games. So to assume that no one is going to get hurt is also, I don't think that is a good line of thinking either when you're looking ahead to next season. Well, we're going to get this guy back, this guy back, this guy back, and that guy back. Well, you might also lose this guy and that guy. And it has to be said. Injuries happen in sports. Nobody's immune to them.
Yeah, what I really think their vision right now is they want to shore up things defensively, and they don't even not to say they don't care about offense, but they're not focused on that right now. They want to shore things up defensively, and if they prove that they can play John Tortorella's style and they significantly cut down their goals against and say they're competitive and maybe they have a chance, then they'll address offense. But I think they want to first see this team play the right way and cut down the goals against, and then they'll go out and maybe make a splash offensively, whether it's at the trade deadline next year, whether it's next offseason. If they feel like they took a step closer to being a contender, then they'll look to spend money or clear money. I think that's really where they're at, is like they're just not even really committing money to offense right now. They already have 6 forwards making over $5 million. So I think right now they're really saying we got to get better defensively and play the right way first before we can even worry about getting flashy playmakers that put the puck in the net. So that's.
And if you look at John Tortorella's history, particularly with the Columbus Blue Jackets, he took a similar team to the playoffs, and they swept a team that would go on to win 2 Stanley Cups in a row, in the Tampa Bay Lightning a few years back. So that particular Columbus team did not have. They had Cam Atkinson, but they didn't have a plethora of goal scorers. So if you're, you could look at that and say, okay, so there's not, like, the sky isn't falling, because John Tortorella has a history of getting more out of players than necessarily what it says on a piece of paper. And if you're counting on that, okay. But again, the messaging to me is, I know we were going to talk about the worst non-move, and the non-move to me is the messaging. Because the messaging is aggressive retool, and nothing about what they've done so far falls in line with the aggressive retool mindset.
Flyers Talk is brought to you by Great Railing. Stop into Great Railing for the highest quality and lowest prices on all your railing, decking, and fencing needs. Yeah, Joe, you teased it. I think it's probably the most opinionated topic right now among Flyers land, is what was the worst non-move so far the Flyers offseason. I'm sure a lot of people would think Johnny Gaudreau and not really going after him, a guy that appeared to want to play in Philadelphia, a guy that scored 115 points, scored over 40 goals last year. The team didn't really appear like they went after him all that aggressively because of their salary cap situation. So, Joe, in your mind, worst non-move, what do you got?
I'm like I said, I'm going to say that the lack of moves overall is the worst non-move, because you told fans we're doing this quickly with this aggressive retool label, and then nothing about what you did matches up with that. And I think that's overall, that is the worst non-move. There's still guys out there, but again, the messaging last week was, we can't move anything, we have no room, so we're out. So I don't think fans are even thinking about who else is out there, because you told them not to, essentially. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the worst non-move, because I think a lot of times, as a fan, what you're looking for is hope. And whether that be hope to get in the playoffs or in the offseason, hope to land a big-time player. And I think the Flyers, in their messaging last week, took that away in very blunt terms. And I'm not sure that is what this fan base was looking for.
Yeah, it's almost like they're quietly rebuilding. Or really not going for it fully this season. Like they want to be better and more competitive, but they're doing it in smaller steps. And
if they would have come out last week and said, we're tanking next season to try to get Connor Bedard in the draft, who is supposed to be the generational player that would be in next year's draft, I think fans would have wrapped their arms around that a lot more than what they heard last week. Now, you're never going to get anybody to say that. And we've seen in this league, things go the way you don't think. So it's not like it's a little different than the NBA, where it's when teams are tanking, it becomes obvious. No one says it, but the product on the court looks and feels like someone's tanking to bottom out to get free agents or draft picks or whatever the case may be. In hockey, it's not that simple. You don't really see that. But all I'm saying is, if you would have told fans we're going to be terrible, I think they would have grasped that message a lot more than the message that is right now out there, which is kind of like this just in the middle ground. We're stuck, almost like you're in hockey purgatory here. Like, and how long will you be there type of thing. And no daylight was provided by anything that this team said last week.
Yeah, it's really tough to be full go competitive in the present, but also having a real focus on the future. It's tough to do both. The best teams can do both. They can be competitive and contending now, and then they can also be focused on the future and making sure when things start to cycle, they're still in it down the road. But it's not easy to do. If I had to pick something maybe aside from the Johnny Gaudreau non-move, I still believe they could have been a player for him, and it would have been a good time to do it, especially when it seems like fan interest is really lacking and there's some frustration. Butts weren't in seats toward the end of last year, or really from about January on. I thought it would have been great. Johnny Gaudreau would have been great organizationally in terms of business and promotion and all that fun stuff. But if I had to go maybe somewhere else, I could look at goalie, Joe. I would say, did they really address backup goalie? They got Troy Grosnick, but he doesn't have a lot of NHL games to his name. And they're going to let the backup position kind of play out through Grosnick, Felix Sandstrom, and Samuel Ersson. Again, all younger players that have not played in the NHL a whole lot. And to me, that's a little problematic, a little worrisome, because Carter Hart's only 23, and he looked like he rebounded last year, but there's nothing absolute about him not struggling again or needing help. And this team has given up the most goals over the last 2 seasons, along with the Devils. So, what if Carter struggles? What if they don't play well in front of their goalie? What if Hart maybe deals with an injury? You don't really have anything with experience in your backup position. Now, maybe they could address that later on if they feel like they need to. But right now, I feel like maybe a non-move is also not addressing the backup goalie position, which I think is pivotal, especially with a team that's given up a lot of shots and a lot of goals over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would say add to that, we've seen Carter Hart deal with these little nagging injuries.
Yeah.
Pretty much every season since he's come up. And the days where a goalie plays, 75 games are gone. It just doesn't really happen outside of maybe Andrei Vasilevsky in Tampa. But so you need a backup goalie that can play 20 games. You don't need a backup goalie that can play, 5 to 10 games. You need a guy that can play a sizable amount of games. And like you said, I'm not sure they have that guy on the roster right now. And that's definitely a concern.
Yeah, and maybe it's time. Maybe eventually you got to take the training wheels off of some of these backup goalies and let them take games, let them get in net and see if they can do it. Like Felix Sandstrom's not really young anymore. I believe he's 25. I don't want to say that for fact, but I believe he's in that 25-year-old range. I'm not sure of Troy Grosnick's age. I know he's a little older as well. But, again, we'll see, where this team is defensively and from a goal prevention standpoint. They need to be better in front of Carter Hart, and they really need Carter Hart to show that he's the guy. If he can be the guy and the team is better in front of him, then I think you can really get by with having maybe a less proven backup. But if you hit roadblocks from a health standpoint or from a system standpoint, then suddenly I think that backup goalie position could be vital, and you're going to need a lot of games, and you're going to have to hope one of these younger guys, not younger, but one of these unproven guys comes in and proves themselves.
I just looked, and Sandstrom is 25 and
okay.
Grosnick is 32.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, those guys are in veteran ages.
Yeah.
I mean, Sandstrom definitely less so than Grosnick.
Yeah.
But, you know, at 32, it's hard to envision Grosnick, who has limited NHL experience, coming in and playing 20-plus games. You just don't see that happening at 32 because it would have happened before now at some point. So, yeah, it's definitely a concern.
Yeah, and maybe this is part of their, trying to save money and not fully go for it. Like they're going to let some young guys play at forward and in net, and they're going to save money doing so. Obviously, Martin Jones last year made $2 million as a backup. Right now, they're probably saving a little bit by not going out and spending $2 to $3 million on a backup or $1.5 million on a backup. They're going to let some kids play, see if they can play, and if they can't, then they'll adjust. I think that's really the approach right now. But I think they believe they can cut down on their goals against and at least be competitive in that way. Well, Joe, this was fun. It was fun looking at all the moves, the non-moves, what we thought was the best and the worst of this offseason. Who knows if it's done for certain? I don't think they're going to be spending money right now, but possibly they make a trade to clear money and add on a player with money. We shall see. But we'll continue to cover it all here on the Flyers Talk. But, Joe, thanks so much. Great seeing you and great chatting with you. As always, appreciate your insight. A big thank you to Ben Berry, our podcast producer and guru. Thank you to him. And thank you, as always, to Flyers fans for listening to the latest Flyers Talk podcast presented by Great Railing. Wherever you get your podcast, please rate and listen. And we can't wait to talk to you next time.